For 6 years, I believed love was something you built one ordinary day at a time, not through grand romantic gestures, not through expensive gifts, but through consistency. My name is Ethan Carter, and I worked as a biomedical engineer, designing and improving medical equipment used in hospitals across the country. The work rarely attracted attention. Patients never knew my name. Doctors rarely thought about the engineers behind the machines they relied upon every day. That never bothered me. If a device I helped develop made someone's surgery safer or gave a family one more chance with a loved one, I considered my job worthwhile. I wasn't famous. I wasn't wealthy, but I was proud of the life I had built. 6 years earlier, I had met Vanessa Moore during a university research conference. She was ambitious, intelligent, and endlessly optimistic. Our first conversation lasted nearly 4 hours. By the end of the evening, we had exchanged phone numbers. Within a year, we were inseparable. We celebrated promotions together, supported each other through difficult projects, dreamed about buying a home, and eventually starting a family. When I proposed beside the lake where we had shared our first date, Vanessa cried before saying yes. I honestly believed I had found the person I would grow old with. Our wedding was only 1 month away. The venue had been reserved. Invitations had been mailed. My suit was hanging in the wardrobe waiting for the ceremony. Life felt wonderfully ordinary. Then everything changed on a rainy Tuesday evening. I arrived home carrying takeout from Vanessa's favorite Italian restaurant. The apartment was unusually quiet. She sat alone on the sofa, still wearing her office clothes. She wasn't reading. She wasn't watching television. She simply stared at the coffee table. Something immediately felt wrong. I placed the food on the kitchen counter. "Long day." She looked up slowly. "We need to talk." Those 4 words instantly made my stomach tighten. I sat across from her. "What happened?" She took a deep breath. "I've met someone." For several seconds, I honestly thought she meant a new client or colleague. Then I noticed the tears gathering in her eyes. My heartbeat slowed instead of speeding up, almost as though my mind refused to understand what she was about to say. "His name is Adrian Lawson." I recognized the name immediately. Dr. Adrian Lawson, one of the city's youngest and most celebrated heart surgeons. His medical breakthroughs had appeared in national newspapers. Television interviews praised both his talent and his charity work. People described him as brilliant, successful, extraordinary. Vanessa lowered her eyes. "I didn't plan for this. It just happened." I remained completely still. She continued speaking. "I've fallen in love with him." The sentence echoed through the apartment. Every decoration we had chosen together. Every wedding invitation sitting neatly on the dining table. Every photograph hanging on the walls. Suddenly, none of it seemed real. I finally managed to ask the only question that mattered. "When?" "A few months ago." Months. While we were finalizing wedding plans, meeting photographers, choosing music, discussing honeymoon destinations, she had already been falling in love with someone else. Vanessa wiped away a tear. "Ethan, you're a wonderful man. You've never treated me badly. You've always supported me." I looked at her quietly. "But," she hesitated, "I think I deserve someone with a brighter future." The words landed harder than anything else she had said. Not because she had chosen another man, because she had measured my worth against his success. She wasn't leaving because I had failed her. She was leaving because someone else stood on a higher pedestal. She looked toward the engagement ring on her finger. "Adrian's life is different. He can give me opportunities one never imagined. I don't want to spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been." For a long moment, I simply stared at the floor. Then I nodded. "If that's truly how you feel, I'm not going to beg you to stay." Vanessa looked surprised. "You aren't angry?" I gave a tired smile. "I am. But love isn't something you can argue someone into feeling." Slowly, she removed the engagement ring and placed it on the coffee table between us. Neither of us reached for it. In that quiet apartment, surrounded by the life we had spent 6 years building together, I realized something painful. Sometimes a relationship doesn't end because love disappears. Sometimes it ends because one person begins believing that someone else's future shines brighter than the one they already have. Neither of us spoke after that. The silence stretching through the apartment was heavier than any argument could have been. I looked around the living room we had decorated together over the past 3 years. The framed photographs from weekend trips, the bookshelf we had assembled on our first night after moving in, the handwritten list of wedding tasks still attached to the refrigerator with a small magnet shaped like a heart. Every corner held a memory, yet none of it felt like. Neither of us spoke after that. The silence stretching through the apartment was heavier than any argument could have been. I looked around the living room we had decorated together over the past 3 years. The framed photographs from weekend trips, the bookshelf we had assembled on our first night after moving in, the handwritten list of wedding tasks still attached to the refrigerator with a small magnet shaped like a heart. Every corner held a memory, yet none of it felt like home anymore. Vanessa quietly stood. "I'll stay with a friend tonight. You can have some time." I nodded once. "All right." She picked up a small overnight bag that had apparently been packed before I arrived. That hurt more than I expected. This conversation hadn't been spontaneous. She had already made her decision. At the front door, she hesitated. "I'm sorry, Ethan." I looked at her calmly. "I believe you are. But being sorry doesn't change what comes next." She lowered her head and walked away. The apartment door closed with a soft click. For a long time, I remained exactly where I was. Not because I expected her to come back, because I knew she wouldn't. The following morning, I packed my belongings into several cardboard boxes. I didn't argue over furniture or decorations. Most of them had been chosen together, but I no longer wanted reminders of promises that no longer existed. My closest friend, Nathan Reed, arrived with his pickup truck just after 9 o'clock. He stepped inside, looked at the boxes, and sighed. "So it's true." "It is." He helped me carry everything downstairs without asking unnecessary questions. Only after we finished loading the final box did he speak again. "You could fight for her." I closed the truck's tailgate. "No. What if she's making a mistake? Then it's her mistake to discover." Nathan folded his arms. "You still love her." "I do. But I refuse to become someone's second choice." He studied me for a moment before nodding slowly. "I was hoping you'd say that." A week later, I settled into a modest apartment closer to the biomedical research center where I worked. The place was smaller, quieter, almost empty except for a bed, a dining table, and stacks of unopened boxes. In some ways, the simplicity helped. There were fewer memories to unpack. Work became my refuge. Design reviews, prototype testing, and long hours in the laboratory gave my mind something productive to focus on. Then, on Friday afternoon, an unexpected envelope arrived at my office. Inside was an elegant invitation embossed in silver lettering. Lawson Foundation Annual Charity Hospital Gala. At first, I assumed it had been delivered by mistake. Then I noticed the handwritten note tucked inside. "Your contributions to biomedical innovation have helped improve patient care in countless hospitals. We would be honored by your presence." The invitation had been sent because one of our medical devices had recently been selected for a nationwide charitable healthcare initiative. My attendance had nothing to do with Vanessa. I considered declining. Instead, I decided to go, not for socializing, but because the event supported hospitals serving families who could not otherwise afford advanced treatment. That cause mattered more than my personal discomfort. The grand ballroom shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers as doctors, researchers, philanthropists, and business leaders gathered to celebrate another successful year of fundraising. I kept mostly to myself, speaking with engineers and hospital administrators about future medical technology. For the first time in days, I almost forgot everything that had happened. Then I noticed a familiar face across the room. Dr. Adrian Lawson. He stood surrounded by reporters and hospital executives, smiling confidently as cameras flashed around him. Beside him was Vanessa. She wore a beautiful evening gown and laughed at something he whispered. Neither of them noticed me. I quietly turned away. There was no scene, no confrontation, only the quiet realization that our lives had already begun moving in different directions. A few moments later, an elegant woman with silver-streaked hair approached me. Her posture reflected quiet confidence, and kindness shone in her eyes. "Excuse me," she said warmly. "You must be Ethan Carter." I looked at her with polite surprise. "I'm sorry, have we met?" She offered a graceful smile. "No, But I know who you are. She extended her hand. My name is Margaret Lawson. The name immediately caught my attention. Before I could respond, she continued softly. I owe you an apology. Confused, I shook her hand. For what? Neither of us spoke. Adrian and Vanessa on the silence side stretching through the apartment was heavier than any argument. For the pain my son's choices I looked around the living room. I started to decorate together over the past 3 years. But she gently raised a hand. The framed photographs from weekend trips, allow an old mother a few minutes. The bookshelf we had assembled on our first night after moving. I had no idea the handwritten list of wedding changed the direction still attached to the refrigerator with a small magnet shaped like a heart. Margaret Lawson would make the most unexpected proposal. Yet none of it felt like home anymore. The charity gala ended with the conversation. I'll stay with a friend tonight. You can have some Lawson. And I sat in a quiet lounge. All right, overlooking. She picked up a small overnight bag that away from the music and flashing cameras. That hurt. She never tried to defend her son. This conversation never asked me to forgive anyone. Instead, she had already made her decision. After hearing the story of my broken engagement, she hesitated. She sighed softly. I looked at my entire life teaching my children that success, but being sorry doesn't change what comes at the cost of another. She lowered her head and walked away. She folded her hands door closed with a soft click. I'm deeply sorry that our family became part of your pain. I remained exactly where I was. I shook my head, not because I expected her to come back. Adrian made his own choices. The following morning, did Vanessa. I packed my belongings into several cardboard boxes. Perhaps. I didn't argue over furniture never decorations. For a moment, most of them had been chosen together. But I no longer wanted reminders of my younger daughter would like no longer existed. I'm sorry. My closest friend, she laughed quietly. Nathan Reed, I know how unusual that sounds. Just after 9 o'clock. I'm not trying to arrange. He stepped inside. I simply believe two good people should have the chance to meet. So it's true. I smiled politely. He helped me carry everything downstairs, but I don't think I'm ready. Unnecessary Margaret nodded as though she had only after we finished loading the final box did he speak again. Then don't think of it as you could fight for her. Think of it as dinner. I closed the truck's You've already spent 6 years building a relationship. What if she's making a mistake? Surely you can spare one evening meeting someone new. Nathan folded his arms. I laughed. You still love her. You're very persuasive. But my children complain about someone's second choice. She reached into her handbag for a moment and placed a small business card on the table. I was hoping you'd say my daughter is an architect. A week later, if you ever change your mind, modest apartment closer to the biomedical I slipped the card into my wallet. Worked. Never the place was smaller. 3 weeks passed. Almost empty. Life slowly settled into a routine. A dining table. Work remained stacks busy. Of unopened boxes. The loneliness became in some ways. The simplicity helped. Some evenings there were fewer memories to unpack, but they no longer work became my refuge. One Saturday afternoon, prototype testing, while cleaning my apartment, long hours Margaret's in the business card slipped gave my mind something productive. I stared at it for several seconds. On Friday there was no reason not to call. An unexpected envelope meeting someone for dinner wasn't a promise. Inside was an elegant betrayal of my past. Embossed. It was simply one conversation. Lawson Foundation before I could change my mind, charity hospital I dialed the number. At first, I assumed it had been delivered by mistake. Then I noticed the handwritten note Charlotte tucked inside. Yes. Your contributions to biomedical innovation. There was a brief improved patient care. My mother told me you might call someday. We would be honored by your presence. Myself. The invitation had been very confident because one of our medical devices had recently been selected for a nationwide after a few minutes of easy conversation. My attendance had nothing to do with the following Friday. I considered the restaurant Margaret recommended. Instead, I decided to go. Not for socializing. It wasn't because the event supported hospitals serving families who could not otherwise. It was known for excellent food and peaceful that cause mattered more than my personal discomfort. Charlotte was the grand ballroom shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers as doctors. She wore a simple navy blue dress with a light cardigan, and business leaders gathered to celebrate another successful grown used to seeing at corporate events. I kept mostly to myself. Charlotte, speaking with engineers before hospital administrators about future medical technology, she said with a grin. For the first time in days, I almost exaggerated everything that had happened. Then I noticed the familiar face across the room. She laughed. Dr. Adrian Then we're off to an honest start. He stood surrounded by reporters flowed naturally from the very beginning. Smiling she spoke about architecture with genuine enthusiasm. Beside him luxury was Vanessa. She wore a beautiful evening gown, affordable housing at something community centers. Neither of them noticed designed for neighborhoods. I quietly turned away. Rarely received. There was no scene. No, spent the last 5 years only working the quiet with realization that our lives had already begun. Most people assume architects only design expensive buildings. An elegant woman, but I like creating places where ordinary families can build better lives. Her posture reflected quiet confidence. I found myself kindness shone in her eyes. That sounds meaningful. Excuse me, she said. She tilted her head curiously. You must be Ethan Carter. What about you? I looked at her with polite surprise. How much do you earn? Have we met? What position? She offered a graceful smile. What car do you drive? No. Instead, but I know who Charlotte asked something entirely She extended her hand. What made you choose biomedical engineering? The name immediately caught me off guard. I thought for a moment before answering. She continued My grandfather spent years in hospitals before he passed away. I shook her hand. I remember watching doctors rely on equipment that sometimes fail. I wanted to help improve those tools, so patients might have a better chance. Charlotte's eyes brightened. That's a beautiful reason. There was no calculation in her expression, no hidden judgment, only genuine interest. For the first time in a very long while, I realized someone wasn't evaluating what I had achieved. She wanted to understand who I was. Dinner lasted nearly 3 hours. Neither Charlotte nor I noticed how late it had become until the restaurant staff quietly began clearing nearby tables. Our conversation never felt forced. We talked about childhood memories, favorite books, embarrassing university stories, and the dreams we had carried since we were teenagers. At one point, Charlotte smiled thoughtfully. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. What kind of family did you grow up in?" The question surprised me, not because it was difficult, because it was so different from the conversations I had grown used to. "My parents are both school teachers," I replied. "They never had much money, but they always made time for us. My father taught me that your reputation is built one promise at a time. My mother believed kindness mattered most when nobody was watching." Charlotte listened carefully. "They sound wonderful." "They are." She smiled. "My parents always told us something similar. My mother says character is what remains after success disappears." I laughed softly. She mentioned something like that at the charity gala. Medical conferences required constant travel. Patients needed him during holidays, birthdays, and weekends alike. One evening, Vanessa carefully prepared dinner in Adrian's apartment. The table was set. Candles flickered softly. She glanced at the clock. 7 o'clock, then 8. At 9, her phone finally rang. "I'm sorry," Adrian said, exhaustion filling his voice. "A multiple car accident came into the emergency department. I won't make it tonight." Vanessa forced a smile, even though he couldn't see it. "I understand." After ending the call, she looked around the empty dining room. The expensive apartment suddenly felt strangely quiet. Over the following weeks, the same pattern repeated. Dinner plans were canceled, vacations postponed, special occasions interrupted by emergency operations. Vanessa slowly realized something she had never considered before. Adrian wasn't neglecting her because he didn't care. He was simply devoted to the profession that had made him successful. The glamorous future she had imagined came with sacrifices she had never noticed from a distance. One Saturday afternoon, Charlotte and I sat on a park bench after finishing another volunteer project. Children laughed nearby, while families enjoyed the warm sunshine. Charlotte handed me a bottle of water. "You've been smiling more lately." I looked at her curiously. "Have I?" She nodded. "When we first met, it felt like you were carrying something heavy. And now?" She smiled gently. "Now it looks like you're finally putting it down." I looked around the peaceful park. She was right. The heartbreak hadn't disappeared overnight, but it no longer defined every moment of my life. For years, I had believed love meant proving my worth to someone else. Charlotte had quietly shown me something entirely different. The healthiest relationships weren't built on comparison, admiration, or status. They were built on being genuinely seen, appreciated, and accepted for who you already were. For the first time in years, I wasn't trying to become enough for someone. With Charlotte, I already was 3 months past quietly. Life no longer revolved around recovering from heartbreak. Instead, it revolved around building something new. Charlotte and I had never rushed our relationship. We remained honest with each other from the beginning. Some weekends we volunteered together at community housing projects. Other evenings we explored small cafes, bookstores, and local art exhibitions. There was no pressure to impress one another. No games. No uncertainty. Every conversation felt effortless because neither of us was pretending to be someone else. One Friday afternoon, Charlotte called while I was finishing work at the research laboratory. "Are you free tomorrow evening?" "I should be. My mother invited us to the Lawson Foundation charity fundraiser." I smiled. "Us?" She laughed softly. "She specifically said I wasn't allowed to come alone. I suspect she's trying to help." "I suspect you're right. Would you like to go?" I thought for a moment. The event would undoubtedly include Adrian, possibly Vanessa. Months earlier, I would have refused without hesitation. Now the thought no longer filled me with anxiety. "All right," I replied. "I'd like to go." The ballroom was even grander than the hospital gala where I had first met Margaret. Crystal chandeliers illuminated tables decorated with white roses, while a string quartet played quietly near the stage. Doctors, business leaders, researchers, architects, and philanthropists gathered to support children's healthcare initiatives. Charlotte slipped her arm through mine as we entered. "Nervous?" "Not really." She smiled. "Good." Before we had taken more than a few steps, Margaret Lawson approached with her usual graceful warmth. "There you are." She hugged Charlotte before turning toward me. "Ethan, I'm so glad you came. Thank you for inviting me." She looked between us with obvious satisfaction. "I had a feeling the two of you would become good friends." Charlotte laughed. "You've been saying that since before we met." And I was right. Margaret linked her arm with mine as naturally as though I had known her for years. "I've been telling everyone about the biomedical research project you're leading." I smiled awkwardly. "I hope you didn't exaggerate." "Not at all." She looked proudly towards several hospital directors standing nearby. "The devices Ethan's team has developed are already improving patient care in regional hospitals. He's exactly the kind of person our healthcare system needs." Her words carried genuine admiration, not because of my position, not because of my income, but because she respected the work itself. For a moment, I simply thanked her quietly. Recognition based on character always felt different from recognition based on status. Across the ballroom, Vanessa froze. She had arrived with Adrian nearly 20 minutes earlier and had been speaking with donors when she noticed a familiar face. Mine. At first, she assumed I had come alone. Then she saw Charlotte beside me. Moments later, she watched Margaret embrace both of us warmly. Confusion spread across Vanessa's face. She leaned closer to Adrian. "Isn't that your mother?" Adrian followed her gaze. "It is." "Why is she talking to Ethan?" Before Adrian could answer, Margaret laughed at something Charlotte had said and gently adjusted the collar of my jacket with the casual affection of someone welcoming a family member. Vanessa stared in disbelief. "I don't understand." Adrian sighed quietly. "My mother likes him." "Likes him?" "She invited him to dinner months ago." Vanessa turned sharply. "You knew." "I found out afterward." "And you never told me?" Adrian hesitated. "I didn't think it mattered." But it did matter. Watching Margaret smile at Ethan with obvious respect unsettled Vanessa far more than she expected. She had always believed Ethan would eventually fade into the background after their engagement ended. Instead, he seemed happier, more relaxed, and somehow more appreciated than ever before. Margaret soon introduced Charlot, T.E., and me to several hospital trustees. One of them smiled warmly. "So, this is the engineer we've been hearing about. I'm afraid my reputation is growing faster than I am." Everyone laughed. Another trustee looked toward Margaret. "You speak very highly of him." Margaret answered without hesitation. "Because he's earned it." She smiled at me kindly. Character doesn't become more valuable when someone gets richer. It was already valuable from the beginning. Her words were simple, yet they echoed through Vanessa's mind from the opposite side of the ballroom. Months earlier, she had convinced herself that Ethan's future was too ordinary. Now she was watching respected physicians, philanthropists, and community leaders admire the very qualities she had overlooked. For the first time, an uncomfortable question entered her thoughts. Had she mistaken wealth for worth? The fundraiser continued late into the evening, but Vanessa barely heard another conversation. Her attention kept drifting toward Ethan and Charlotte. She watched as Charlotte introduced Ethan to architects, doctors, and charity organizers with quiet pride. Ethan never tried to dominate the conversation or impress anyone. He listened carefully, asked thoughtful questions, and congratulated volunteers for their work instead of talking about his own accomplishments. It was the same man Vanessa had known for 6 years. The difference was that she was finally seeing him through someone else's eyes. Margaret Lawson soon joined the small group, carrying 2 glasses of sparkling water. "Ethan," she said warmly, "the pediatric hospital board loved your proposal for improving the diagnostic equipment." "I'm happy to help," Ethan replied. "The children deserve the best technology we can provide." Margaret smiled with unmistakable admiration. That's exactly why I respect you. She glanced affectionately at Charlotte before continuing. Some people measure success by wealth or popularity. I've always believed true success is measured by the number of lives you quietly improve. Charlotte squeezed Ethan's arm gently. I couldn't agree more. Standing only a few steps away, Vanessa heard every word. Months earlier, she had convinced herself that Ethan's future was too ordinary compared to Adrian's glamorous career. Now she realized something painful. The people she admired most were praising Ethan not because he was rich or famous, but because of the person he had always been. She had never truly appreciated that. As the evening drew to a close, Adrian found Vanessa standing alone near one of the ballroom windows. She was staring outside at the city lights. "You've been quiet all night," he said. "I'm just tired." "No." His voice remained calm. "You're thinking about Ethan?" Vanessa looked down without answering. Adrian sighed. "When we started dating, you told me your previous relationship was completely over." "It was." "Then why have you spent the entire evening watching him?" She closed her eyes for a moment. "I wasn't comparing the two of you." "Weren't you?" His question carried no anger, only honesty. "I watched my mother speak to him tonight. I watched Charlotte look at him. They see something you stopped seeing." Vanessa felt tears gathering in her eyes. "I know." Adrian nodded slowly. "I care about you, Vanessa, but I can't build a future with someone who's still wondering if she made the wrong choice." His words hurt because they were true. She wasn't missing Ethan because Adrian lacked success. She was missing the quiet love, patience, and stability she had once taken for granted. Luxury had never replaced those things. Meanwhile, Charlotte and I stepped outside onto the hospital's rooftop garden. The fundraiser's music faded behind us as cool evening air swept across the terrace. The city skyline shimmered beneath thousands of lights. Charlotte rested her hands on the railing. "It's beautiful up here." "It is." After a comfortable silence, she turned toward me. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." She took a slow breath. "My mother adores you. My friends think you're wonderful. And I care about you more than I expected." She smiled gently. "But I don't want to become someone's replacement." I looked at her carefully. "What do you mean?" "If part of your heart still belongs to Vanessa, then I'll always be competing with a memory." She met my eyes without hesitation. "I won't do that. I want someone who chooses me completely." There was no insecurity in her voice, only quiet self-respect. I admired her even more for saying it. I thought back to the past several months. When Vanessa left, I believed my future had disappeared. Then I remembered every conversation with Charlotte, the volunteer projects, the riverside dinners, the afternoons spent laughing over coffee, the way she listened without judging, the way she cared about people who could never repay her. Without realizing it, she had helped me heal. I smiled softly. "Charlotte," when Vanessa ended our engagement, I thought I had lost the love of my life. She remained silent, waiting for me to finish. I understand now that I wasn't grieving the woman standing in front of me. I was grieving the future I had imagined. I reached for her hand, but that future no longer exists. She looked at me hopefully. "When I picture tomorrow," I continued, "I don't imagine going back. I imagine building something new with you." For a moment, Charlotte simply stared at me. Then the brightest smile I had ever seen appeared on her face. "So, your heart is finally free?" I nodded. "It has been for a while. I just needed tonight to realize it." She slipped her hand into mine. "I'm glad." "So am I." Through the ballroom windows, I caught one final glimpse of Vanessa. Our eyes met briefly. There was no resentment, no longing, only acceptance. She gave me a small, respectful smile. I returned it before turning back to Charlotte. As we walked down the garden path together, I understood something I had spent months learning. You cannot build a meaningful future while constantly looking behind you. The chapter Vanessa and I had shared would always be part of my life, but it was no longer the story I wanted to keep writing. That story had ended. The one waiting beside me had only just begun. 6 months passed almost unnoticed. For the first time in years, my life was no longer defined by what I had lost. Instead, it was shaped by what I was building. Charlotte and I never rushed our relationship. We believed that trust grew through shared experiences rather than dramatic promises. Some weekends, we volunteered at affordable housing projects she designed for low-income families. Other days, she visited my laboratory, asking endless questions about medical devices and celebrating every small breakthrough with genuine excitement. Neither of us tried to impress the other. We simply encouraged each other to become better versions of ourselves. One evening, while reviewing research data in my apartment, Charlotte placed 2 mugs of coffee on the table. "You've been staring at those numbers for 3 hours." I smiled. "They're worth staring at." She laughed. "I'll take your word for it." I handed her a folder. "I've been thinking about something." She opened it carefully. Inside were business plans, financial projections, and engineering designs. "The company?" I nodded. "For years, I've helped improve other people's technology. I think it's time to build something of my own." Charlotte looked through the pages one by one. Portable diagnostic equipment, affordable patient monitoring systems, medical devices designed specifically for small community hospitals that couldn't afford expensive alternatives. Her eyes brightened. "This isn't just a business. No, it's a mission." I smiled. "Exactly." Without hesitation, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Then let's build it." Not because of potential profits, not because of prestige, because she believed in the purpose behind it. That simple moment reminded me once again why our relationship felt so different from the one I had left behind. Charlotte never asked what success could give her. She asked who it could help. The following months became the busiest of my career. Several respected investors who had worked with hospitals recognized the potential of my designs. Unlike flashy technology companies chasing headlines, our focus remained simple. Create reliable medical equipment, reduce costs for hospitals, improve patient care. During one investment meeting, a venture capitalist studied my presentation before closing the folder. "Your numbers are impressive." "Thank you, but that's not why we're interested." I looked at him curiously. "No." He smiled. "We've spoken with physicians, engineers, and hospital administrators who've worked with you. They all described the same thing." I waited quietly. "They said when Ethan Carter promises something, he delivers." The other investors nodded. "In this industry, reputation is more valuable than marketing." Their decision surprised me. They weren't investing because I had the loudest presentation. They were investing because years of consistent work had earned their trust. Within 2 months, Carter Biomedical Innovations officially opened its doors. Standing inside our modest headquarters on the first morning of operations, I looked around at the small team gathered together. Some were engineers, others specialized in manufacturing or clinical testing. Every person there believed in the same goal: building technology that made healthcare better. Not more expensive, better. Charlotte stood beside me as I welcomed everyone. When the meeting ended, she smiled proudly. "I knew you'd get here." I shook my head. "We got here." She laughed. "Fair enough." Across the city, life inside Adrian Lawson's luxury apartment had become increasingly tense. The glamorous lifestyle Vanessa had once imagined now felt strangely empty. Dinner reservations were canceled because emergency surgeries ran late. Weekend trips disappeared whenever the hospital called. Even when Adrian was home, exhaustion often replaced conversation. One evening, Vanessa quietly closed her laptop as Adrian entered after another 14-hour shift. "You're late again." "I'm sorry. A child needed emergency surgery." "I know." She paused. "But that's what you always say." Adrian loosened his tie and looked at her tiredly. "Because it's usually true." Neither of them raised their voices. They didn't need to. The silence between them had become louder than arguments. Vanessa slowly realized something painful. She had mistaken a glamorous life for a peaceful one. The future she had chased looked impressive from the outside. Living inside it felt very different, and for the first time, she began wondering whether she had misunderstood what happiness truly looked like. AS Carter Biomedical Innovations completed its first successful quarter. Our team celebrated a milestone that meant more than any financial report. 3 regional hospitals had adopted our portable diagnostic equipment, allowing smaller communities to access technology that had previously been available only in large medical centers. Watching doctors demonstrate the equipment to young medical residents, I felt the same quiet satisfaction that had first drawn me into biomedical engineering years earlier. Success had never been about becoming the richest person in the room. It had always been about making a meaningful difference. That evening, Charlotte organized a small celebration at our office. There were no extravagant decorations, just pizza, homemade desserts, and a team proud of what they had accomplished together. Raising a glass of sparkling cider, Charlotte smiled at everyone. Here's to building something that improves lives. The room erupted in applause. I looked around at my colleagues and realized something. Every person standing there had chosen to join because they believed in the mission, not because they expected quick wealth or fame. It was exactly the kind of company I had always wanted to build. A week later, I received an unexpected phone call from Vanessa. Her voice sounded quieter than I remembered. "Ethan, could we talk?" I considered the request for a moment before answering. "All right." We met at a peaceful botanical garden where we had once spent an afternoon years ago. This time, there were no wedding plans. No shared future waiting ahead. Only two people whose lives had taken very different directions. Vanessa smiled faintly as I approached. "Thank you for coming. You said it was important." She nodded. "It is." For several moments, she searched for the right words. Finally, she looked directly at me. "I owe you an apology." I remained silent, allowing her to continue. "When I left, I told myself I was choosing a better future." She gave a sad laugh. "I confused financial security with genuine love." Her eyes filled with quiet regret. "I measured your worth by comparing your career to someone else's. I never stopped to appreciate the kind of man you already were." She took a slow breath. "I'm truly sorry." The apology carried no excuses. No attempt to justify the past. Only honesty. I smiled gently. "Thank you." She looked surprised. "That's all? What else should there be? Aren't you angry?" I thought about the question carefully. I was, for a long time, but carrying anger only kept me connected to a chapter that had already ended. She lowered her eyes. "Could we ever?" I gently shook my head before she could finish. "I forgive you, Vanessa." Her shoulders relaxed slightly. "But forgiveness isn't the same as going back." She nodded, tears quietly slipping down her cheeks. "I know. You deserve someone who chooses you completely. And so do I." For the first time since their engagement had ended, there was nothing left unsaid. When we stood to leave, Vanessa offered a small, grateful smile. "I hope you're happy." "I am. I'm glad." She walked away slowly, and I watched her disappear along the garden path. Not with sadness, but with peace. Some people remained important parts of your past. That didn't mean they belonged in your future. That evening, Charlotte and I visited Margaret for dinner. After hearing about my conversation with Vanessa, Margaret smiled knowingly. "I'm proud of you. I only told the truth." "Exactly." She poured tea for everyone before looking toward Charlotte. "Do you know why I encouraged you to meet Ethan?" Charlotte smiled. "I've wondered." Margaret reached across the table and gently held her daughter's hand. "Because character is always the greatest investment a person can make." She looked at me warmly. "Money rises and falls. Careers change. Fame disappears. But integrity has a way of creating opportunities that nothing else can." Charlotte glanced at me with a smile. "I think I made a very good investment." I laughed. "I hope I continue earning it." "You already are," she replied. As we left Margaret's home later that evening, Charlotte slipped her hand into mine. The city lights reflected across the quiet streets as we walked together. Months earlier, I had believed my future had ended with a broken engagement. Now I understood something far more valuable. The strongest relationships were never built on admiration for someone's status. They were built on mutual respect, shared purpose, and the quiet confidence that each person valued the other's character above everything else. And that foundation was worth more than anything money could ever buy. 1 year later, I stood in front of a full-length mirror adjusting my tie while sunlight streamed through the windows of the quiet bridal suite. Nathan Reed, still my closest friend after all these years, leaned against the doorway with a grin. "You know," he said, "I've never seen you this nervous." I laughed. "I'm not nervous." He folded his arms. "You're adjusting the same tie for the 5th time. I just wanted to look right." Nathan shook his head. "No, you just don't want to keep your bride waiting." That made me laugh even harder. He was right. Today wasn't just another milestone. It was the day Charlotte Lawson and I would begin the next chapter of our lives together. A year ago, I couldn't have imagined standing here. Back then, I believed my future had ended with a broken engagement. Now I realized it had only been changing direction. The ceremony took place in the botanical gardens where Charlotte and I had shared one of our earliest conversations after meeting. White flowers lined the stone pathway, leading toward a small pavilion overlooking a peaceful lake. There were no extravagant decorations, no celebrity guests, only family, close friends, and the people who had supported us throughout the past year. Exactly as we wanted. As the music began, I took my place beside the officiant. Guests stood quietly. Then I saw Charlotte. She walked slowly down the garden path beside her mother, Margaret Lawson. Charlotte wore a simple ivory wedding gown that reflected her personality perfectly. Elegant, graceful, uncomplicated. When our eyes met, she smiled. Every nervous thought disappeared. In that moment, nothing else mattered. Margaret gently placed Charlotte's hand in mine before stepping back. Instead of immediately taking her seat, she looked at both of us with warm eyes. "Ethan," she said softly, "there's something I'd like to say." The officiant smiled and nodded. Margaret continued, "The night I met you at the hospital gala, I saw a young man carrying tremendous disappointment. But I also saw someone who treated every person with kindness despite his own pain." She smiled proudly. I hoped life would eventually reward that character. She looked toward Charlotte. "My daughter has always believed that the strongest buildings are built on solid foundations." Then she turned back to me. "I believe the same thing about marriages." She reached out and squeezed both of our hands. "Thank you for loving my daughter with honesty and respect. And thank you for allowing our family to become part of yours." Her voice grew slightly emotional. I couldn't have asked for a better son-in-law. Charlotte wiped away a small tear. "So did I." Margaret laughed softly. "I know." The guests smiled warmly before Margaret returned to her seat. I looked at Charlotte. "I think your mother likes me." Charlotte laughed through happy tears. "I'd say that's a safe assumption." The ceremony itself was simple. We exchanged vows we had written ourselves. Neither of us promised perfection. Instead, we promised honesty during difficult moments, patience when life became complicated, support for each other's dreams, and the commitment to choose one another every single day. When the officiant finally smiled and said, "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the applause echoed across the gardens. Charlotte squeezed my hands before quietly whispering, "We made it." I smiled. We did. During the reception, laughter filled the beautifully decorated hall as friends and family celebrated together. Our engineering team shared stories about the long nights spent building Carter biomedical innovations. Charlotte's colleagues from her nonprofit organization joked that she had finally found someone who worked almost as many hours as she did. Nathan stood to deliver the first toast. "I've known Ethan for most of my life." He smiled toward me. "He's always believed that success comes from solving problems instead of complaining about them." He glanced at Charlotte. The only problem he could never solve alone was finding the right person. Everyone laughed. Nathan raised his glass. "I'm grateful life finally introduced him to someone who recognized his worth long before the rest of the world did." The room responded with warm applause. I looked at Charlotte. She smiled back with quiet confidence. There was no doubt in her eyes. No comparison with anyone else. Only certainty that we had chosen each other. And that certainty was the greatest wedding gift either of us could have received. As dinner drew to a close, soft music filled the reception hall, and guests gathered around the dance floor. Before Charlotte and I stepped forward for our first dance, someone quietly approached our table. It was Adrian Lawson. For a brief moment, the room seemed to grow still. He offered a polite smile. "Ethan, it's good to see you." "You too, Adrian." Charlotte greeted him warmly. "Thank you for coming." He nodded. "I wouldn't have missed my sister's wedding." Turning back to me, Adrian extended his hand. "I owe you more than congratulations." I shook his hand firmly. He continued, "Over the past year, I've had a lot of time to reflect. I spent much of my life believing professional success alone made someone a good partner. He smiled faintly. My career taught me how to save lives. It took my own mistakes to teach me how to value relationships. He looked at Charlotte with obvious affection. My sister chose well. I hope the two of you have a lifetime of happiness. Thank you, I replied sincerely. There are no hard feelings. I know. With one last smile, Adrian stepped away to rejoin the guests. Watching him leave, I realized he had changed. Not because life had been easy, but because he had been willing to learn from it. A few minutes later, another familiar face appeared near the entrance. Vanessa Moore. She had arrived quietly, hoping not to interrupt the celebration. She wore a simple blue dress and carried a neatly wrapped gift. When Charlotte noticed her, she gave her a welcoming smile. I'm glad you came. Vanessa nodded gratefully. I wasn't sure if I should. Charlotte answered gently. Everyone deserves the chance to wish others well. Vanessa looked at me. I won't stay long. I only wanted to congratulate both of you. She handed Charlotte the gift. I hope your life together is filled with the happiness you both deserve. Charlotte accepted it warmly. Thank you. Vanessa then turned toward me. A year earlier, saying goodbye would have been painful. Now it simply felt peaceful. I'm happy for you, Ethan. I truly mean that. I smiled. Thank you. I hope you find happiness too. She nodded. I'm working on it. There were no tears, no lingering promises, only two people acknowledging that their lives had taken different paths. Vanessa gave us one final smile before quietly leaving the reception. As the doors closed behind her, I silently wished her well. The past had shaped both of us, but it no longer controlled either of us. The band began playing a gentle melody. Charlotte looked at me and smiled. I think they're waiting for us. I laughed.